Hi, this is Paul from Pear Tree Education. Today's video is a follow-up to the video I did about student collaboration. This video is designed to provide an actual example of student collaboration in action. It also illustrates the proper role of a teacher, i.e. that of a mentor. This example I'm given is by no means original. It's based around lit circles and the multiple roles that students play within those lit circles. I find the student collaboration through this activity to be so effective that I actually use it within ESL classes. Firstly, let's just go through the different roles that I usually use within my lit circle classes. The first position is the discussion director, and this person is responsible, as it suggests, for actually conducting the discussion, not necessarily leading it, but actually making sure that everyone has a voice within the group. This is a great role because it emphasizes the role of a manager, one that doesn't boss people around, but instead ensures that the team works as a cohesive whole. The second position is a character captain. This person is responsible for analysing specific characters within the stories. These could be protagonists, antagonists, or new characters that are introduced in specific chapters. Then there's the word master. In ESL, this is a very useful role because it teaches the students about vocabulary and not only forces students to try to understand vocabulary in context, but also to have to explain it to other students without necessarily referring to a dictionary or reading from a page, but actually discussing the word and then giving the example in action. They can paraphrase sentences, they can use synonyms, etc. The next role is the passage selector. This is someone that chooses a specific part of the chapter, whether it be a paragraph or a whole page, but a part of that chapter that is a key moment in the story, something that changes the dynamics, something that illustrates an important conversation or a specific moment that is decisive within the story. Then there's the culture connector. Again, this is a very, very important role within ESL classes because it's there to illustrate the difference between the culture within the story, which quite often would be a story based on an American or Canadian or British society. And then the students are left to compare this with their own culture. This helps with coming to terms with things such as culture shock or cultural differences. And in multicultural countries such as Canada, this is a very useful technique to use not just within ESL classes, but just within general school classes. This role is very similar to the passage selector and even the character captain, but it's looking at things from a much more cultural perspective about things that people do, things that people say, and how those things differ from how you would say or how you would act within a different culture, and what we can learn from that. From a social perspective, this brings in a whole different level of dynamics because you've got the role of men, women, children, people in professions, people of different social classes, specifically in the UK. So it's not just culture, but the dynamics within the culture itself and how that differs from other cultures. So as you should be able to see already, there are higher level thinking skills in action here, a lot of critical thinking going on. While there might be a lot of facts there on the page, there's a huge amount of dependency on actually reading between the lines and actually having to compare and contrast between one culture and another culture in order to try to make sense of things. And there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer, so it leaves things open to debate. Then the next role is the illustrator, and this again, I've mentioned before about the use of art and how I believe very much in using art for something meaningful. And in a lit circle, this is very much this kind of role where you've got art being used to illustrate the story itself. So you could have someone design a picture which illustrates a specific scene in the story, just like as if you're storyboarding a movie. It's a way of visualizing the story, it's a way of using art, and also communicating what's going on within that page. So someone draws a picture of it, but then has to explain what's going on in that picture. And this opens to debate people's different points of view about, or how did they visualize this story? How did they see things taking place? And the final role is the summarizer. This is in some ways kind of a little bit more of a tedious role because this is a person that has to summarize all of the main events of a chapter. Rather than copy the text from the page, they have to paraphrase the information and to be able to decisively choose the most important aspects of the story rather than retelling everything because all the students have already read that chapter. They don't need to reread it again. They want someone just to be able to pick up the highlights and then remind everyone about what those highlights are. Now, if you have a group of 30 students, you're not going to have all the students playing the same roles. You're going to have smaller groups, maybe groups of 4 to 7, and students may take on one role, they may take on multiple roles, and you would balance that out based on the workload for that specific role. So there are things like the summarizer, which is quite an intensive role in terms of the writing involved, and you may want to balance that out by giving them the role of illustrator at the same time. So as you can see on the screen here, we've got 4 different students, and each of them play different roles, or maybe just one role depending on how things work out. Another important aspect here is not just that they play multiple roles, but that these roles will change. They will never play the same role day to day. Every day they play a different role, and before long they've carried out all of the different roles involved. By the end of the book, they should be able to act independently, in other words, dissect the story using all of these different skills. But ultimately, it's about teaching them how to work as a group and how that group cohesion forms a much stronger whole than one person alone and what they would be able to achieve. Then there's the role of the teacher. What is the teacher doing while all of this is taking place? Well, clearly the teacher may play a role in the choice of the book, although I would still think that the students would have some say in this. But in an ESL classroom, I would choose a book based on the content of the book, and the students wouldn't necessarily know which would be the best book. But there are many ESL books out there like the Penguin Readers, which I don't find particularly useful because the stories are basically translations of classic stories which are completely useless in a modern society. So I will choose a book which has a modern context with a lot of relevance to what goes on in our society as a whole and can teach students about how people in our culture interact. But beyond choosing the book, the teacher's role is to act as a mentor. It's someone that observes the students, watches how they interact, ensures that people like the discussion director are able to make sure that the team are working as a whole, and that there aren't individuals that are just completely dominating the conversation all the time, or talking down to people, or essentially undermining the efforts of other people by condescending them, by telling them that they're wrong or anything like that. It's about finding a good balance between people playing different roles and having opportunities to speak. Then of course there's the dynamics of the group and how it's possible to have a very kind of lively discussion. It may get heated at times, which I think is okay, but actually looking at how the group interacts and seeing how effective they are at doing this, and knowing where to draw the line, when to make a decision, who's going to actually ultimately say, okay, well, here's all these different ideas, but we have to kind of make a group decision about what this is and take a stance on that. So you've got the teacher looking out for the mediator, but also someone who's going to be very proactive and very decisive about getting people to make a decision, or making a decision for the group if the group is just completely indecisive. So that summarizes this activity, and that's basically the point of this video, is just to illustrate student collaboration in action, and also the role of the teacher, that the teacher isn't leading the class, the teacher isn't constantly interfering with the group activities. They're there as an observer and offering feedback perhaps at the end of the class or in between if things get out of control. But beyond that, they do nothing else. The students do all of the work. To mix things up a bit, you can have different sizes of groups, which has quite a large effect on the group dynamics. You can mix the students around so they don't get used to studying with one another. And obviously the complexity of the book will have an effect on the group's ability to work together. As I mentioned before, this is not an original idea, it's one that's already being used in many schools, but I do think that it illustrates student collaboration, albeit it kind of lacks the theme-based and integrated subjects that I believe in 21st century education. But here I'm just focusing on the student collaboration aspect. Anyway, that about wraps up today's video. If you've enjoyed it, please give us a rating. You can leave your comments below and I'll be happy to get back to you. And if you haven't already done so, you can subscribe above. This is Paul from Pear Tree Education. Thanks for watching.